Hello.
Excuse me. Can I get another caipirinha from my friend Sabby Sabs? She'd like a nice Brazilian drink. Thank you. For you, caipirinha.
Oh.
Salud.
Hello. Oh, man.
Sabby.
Cheers. Okay, guys.
Can you hear us?
I can hear you just great.
Okay.
Cool.
Awesome.
All right, guys. My special guests tonight are Fiorella and Pasta from the Convo Couch. Guys, welcome back.
Thank you for having us back, Sabby. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. So, obviously, huge election. So I want you guys to explain to everyone with this particular election in Brazil with Lula and Bolsonaro, why was this election so significant?
Okay. Well, this election was significant because we're talking about economics here. We're talking about an economy very similar to our own in the United States. High inflation, high poverty, high crime rates, income inequality, vast wealth disparity, racism, a lot of discriminatory policies, and of course, the decadence of a neoliberal austerity measures falling apart, along with the privatization of the entire country. And so that is what Bolsonaro represented. The problem is that Bolsonaro, very much like some of the right-wing populists in our country, presented himself as somebody that is challenging the establishment, somebody that's different, even though he's wealthy. And he, of course, was the one questioning the pandemic more. And he led with the charges against Lula da Silva, still being a corrupt politician. And as a workers candidate, I would definitely say he was more of a better version of a Bernie Sanders than anything remotely close to Joe Biden. But he definitely has been the candidate of the people. He won twice before. I mean, he's been president before. So it's not like he doesn't have a history. And of course, he was jailed on charges of corruption that were later dropped. So it really just signifies two polar opposite sides of the political spectrum in Brazil in an economy that's very similar to our own.
To me, the biggest thing is class. It really is. I woke up today just shaking my head and they're like, Sabby, it's the oldest trick in the book. Keep the people divided so then you can keep all the wealth to yourself, that being the ruling class. And I don't know, how they do it, but they do it and they do it effectively. When it comes to actual resources getting into the poorest of the poor, Lula has always championed that and he has always proved that he can do that. In fact, he took them off the poverty index after 2 terms of a president. However, we're in Sao Paulo, a lot of people part of the gig economy, the working class, and they still kind of will accept the fact that Lula, in their mind, is a criminal, despite getting acquitted on all charges. And they really have this kind of disdain for poor people. When Lula did the interview with Glenn Greenwald, the thing that he pointed out to me more than anything was he said that you saw a lot of, middle working class people seeing all these poor people, all these indigenous people at the airport for the first time ever, getting to experience getting on a plane and going to travel, and they were looked upon like with such disdain. Well, that still exists over here in Brazil and exists very strongly, and you can see it. But it's so nuanced to what's going on. It's like hashtag it's confusing, or hashtag it's complicated. I'm a boomer. But I mean, there's part of the petty bourgeoisie over here, the owner class, that has moved away from Bolsonaro because they see so much social unrest that they want some form of stability. So therefore, they've been backing Lula, some of them. So they're actually the owner class is kind of split. But who is really winning under Bolsonaro is these multinational corporations. They've taken away small agriculture, the indigenous people who fight for their lands, and they've given it to big corporations who are now making so much money. Brazil is a country rich in resources. It should not be poor at all. There should not be so many poor people. Fiorella had her phone stolen last night. Our other friend had his phone stolen 4 people we know on this trip got their phones stolen. So there is this sense of social unrest, and a lot of people feel if Lula doesn't get back into power, that it's just going to be chaos over here. But you have the conservatives in America who've been backing Bolsonaro mainly because of his COVID policies, because, a broken clock is wrong 2 times a day. And if you feel that way, they still politicize the whole situation. So it's just one of those situations. It's very complicated. It's very nuanced, and it's so important. It's the matchup we never got. It's the Bernie Sanders versus the Donald Trump we never got. And it's just the results didn't surprise me last night. Fiorella thinks that Lula's still going to win. I still think there's a good chance he can win, but I think it was a win. It was a victory for Bolsonaro yesterday, getting to the second round. And I now feel that Lula is vulnerable.
So there's this article here from the BBC, and there was something I highlighted here that I thought was important. It said Brazil's Lula and Bolsonaro face runoff after surprisingly tight result. And the piece I highlighted here says with almost all the votes counted, Lula had won 48% against Bolsonaro's 43%, a much closer result than the opinion polls had suggested. Did you expect Lula to have a larger lead than he had? I'm just curious, since both of you were there on the ground.
No.
We didn't. We knew a lot of people did, especially towards the end. People were saying, polls were saying his lead increased, Lula's lead increased. But we were really deciding on when to come here, because obviously I'm all the way in Moscow, and we really didn't want to repeat Colombia, where we came for the first round and we weren't there for the second round, because that's when shenanigans can happen. And then we did, and we were fighting with Wyatt Reed because he was like, there's going to be a second round. We're like, yeah, but in case there isn't, we can't risk it. And so he's like, a lot of our friends are going to be here the second round, hopefully. But we came the first round, and this wasn't really that surprising to us, because we've been following this race for a long time. We know that a lot of Bolsonaro supporters, like he was mentioning, are cab drivers, Uber drivers, people really voting against their own interests, because at the end of the day, they don't have more in common with Bolsonaro and Bolsonaro supporters. They have more in common with Lula supporters. The problem is, of course, there's this divisive rhetoric. Sometimes you have like the contingent on the Lula supporters that are more liberal leaning, kind of like progressive Democrats type of thing. And then you have the leftists that are actually, social movement leaders and people that consider themselves Marxists, that are like, we don't think Lula is left enough at all. He's just a progressive Democrat. But we really need to get something done here, because we can't put food in our fridge. We don't have enough money. The pandemic, no matter how people feel Bolsonaro handled it, ruined a lot of people's lives. There were still closures of restaurants. People lost their jobs. We spoke to families that yesterday didn't have enough to eat. And so this is something that people are still reeling. And what we've noticed is that people felt Lula, because of his previous trajectory in politics, is the one that could bring that back. But of course, the red happens with a lot of Latinx on the right was that he's a communist. He's going to turn Brazil into Venezuela and Cuba. And I'm thinking, look around, guys. There is I have never seen tent cities in Latin American countries like I do here. It's very similar to the United States, the level of poverty. And as he mentioned, a bunch of us got our phones stolen last night. There's just so much crime and poverty and just disillusionment here. It is a structure and decay, and it just shows you what maybe we could become in the United States in a few years, or maybe what we already are on our way going.
Yeah. And I'm not going to speak too much about, the reasons why a lot of the conservatives in America do support Bolsonaro. We obviously know they're due to the protocols, and I don't think, it's hidden where I stand on that. But, when I came here with an open mind and I got to speak to these groups like the MST, which is this big labor movement of peasants that started in the 1980s, in which the PT, which is Lula's party he started, has made a political alignment with before. You see that these people get all this help from Lula, where Lula will help and actually reach out to these poor people and whatnot. So I came with an open mind. And even though I feel a certain way about those protocols, hunger is the number one cause of death in the world. And I think that needs to be addressed more than anything. When you talk to the people on the street, they're like, I used to have eggs, milk, chicken in my refrigerator. Now it's empty. It's bare. And I don't know if you can necessarily blame the issues from the pandemic on Bolsonaro. I think that's unfair because it's a system. We just talked to a doctor here where big pharma, just like in America, has so much power. But the fact that he gave away all these agriculture, he took it away from the indigenous people. It was all about property rights and private rights, and he gave it to big agriculture. So you have all these multinational corporations that have come in and pretty much just raped the land dry. Like I said in my last statement, this country is rich in food and resources, and they're exporting it all, and it's all going into individual pockets. And that is something that Bolsonaro can't get away from. Despite me agreeing with him on his stance on other things, this is the major problem here. And like Fam said, there's too many people starving on the streets. I have never seen this much poverty other than the United States than I've seen in any part of South and Central America.
Do you think, what do you think is Lula's chance of winning the second round?
Right. I think Lula has a huge chance of winning the second round because I think that some of the people that didn't vote for him this time around are going to vote for him. I still think some of the people that didn't vote for Bolsonaro will go to Bolsonaro as well. I think it's going to be a close race. I don't think it's going to be oh my God, he's just going to, win it. No questions asked. And the reason I do think is because the bourgeois class, the class that owns some businesses, the class that sees itself as the middle class, still feels vulnerable to social unrest because as I just mentioned, there's so much theft, crime, like poverty. And you walk down any street here and you will see people literally on the sidewalks lined up everywhere. It is like nothing I've seen. Graffiti everywhere. It's really bad. And a lot of people just want to go back to normal things, and they see Bolsonaro has alienated a lot of people. He's given money to the private corporations, and it's kind of ruining that because even these people that normally used to have some sort of money and income don't have it. So they're kind of aligning with Lula. That's why Lula's vice presidential candidate was actually more of a centrist than many were accustomed to. And the media that put Lula in jail, that was completely against him for so many years, has started to be a little bit more fair towards him because they're like, okay, well, we need to get out of this because this isn't really going our way either. And we don't know like if this is going to cause like, all these people coming in from the streets and trying to overthrow things. I don't think Brazil's quite there yet, but I think that's what's going to cause some people to say, well, let's go see what Lula can do. He's done it before. He a lot of housing, education, healthcare. This is what he ran on, and this is what he's done before. So let's see if he can do that to commons a little bit more.
Yeah, it's like, this is what I've seen out here too as well. Not only it just like the kind of like transparency on the plan to keep the peasant class and the working class divided, because you see that a lot of people in the working class, they despise the poor. They really do. They think it's by their choice that they're there, that they're using drugs or whatnot. But what I also see is that I see a split in the oligarchy a little bit. Like I see entities fighting each other. Like Fiorella just talked about the owner class, the petty bourgeoisie, I believe you guys call them that. They used to walk lockstep together. Now they are split. Now they are fighting because once again, it could be some mad social unrest. So, there's always criticisms of Lula because he went to the World Economic Forum and he, took a picture with Klaus Schwab. And I think all the big players, they have to do that in one way or another because they have to get access to power. My good friend told me that. But then why are the banks, some of the banks supporting him? Why is the media now going his way? They're going that way because they understand it didn't work out under Bolsonaro. And if they continue to go this way, they're going to lose it all. So they want some form of stability. So that's why those bigger entities have kind of switched and moved and they're backing Lula because Lula did once do that. He brought stability. He put food on people's plates. Did I talk about the whole thing at the airport? Was that the last interview? When Glenn Greenwald gave the interview with Lula, and Lula said, he goes, I don't know what it is, but there's a lot of people, they despise that the poor were coming out of poverty. They would see people who were so poor, indigenous people of the Amazon, at the airport, getting to fly for the first time ever because that's what Lula wanted. He wanted the poorest of the poor to experience what it was like to be a human and to travel. And they would look at them with such disdain. You know what I'm saying?
That's a racial thing too in Latin America, though, I have to say.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah. It's
That's
nuanced
interesting.
It's a lot of stuff going on.
I'm curious too, how are the elections ran in Brazil? For example, do they have paper ballots? Is it similar to the way that it was in Colombia?
You want me to go?
Yeah,
first?
you.
I'll go with this one first. Thank you. I get to go first. Listen, it's a very interesting system. I'll say right off the bat, I'd rather have it than what we have in the United States by far. But it's a DRE system. It's a national system, which is the direct recorded electronical device. In other words, you go, you check in, and then you go to a computer screen and you press buttons, and you don't get a receipt. You don't put a paper ballot in. It's hand marked. It's recorded on that machine. Now, however, like always, the Convo Couch does its homework. We went to the election officials. We talked to them. It's an open source system. So all the parties involved have the source code. I went from machine to machine to machine, Sabby, to see if there was any internet. And likewise, they told us there'd be no internet. There was no internet connected to the machines. Unlike in America, where you go to a machine, you're like, oh, yo, this is trying to connect to my phone over here. So there is an open source system. It is efficient. I went to an opening. When I went to an opening, they were printing out the receipts showing that they had 0 votes on it. There's no air gap. It's not plugged into anything. There's no Wi-Fi. It's just plugged into electricity only. At the end, I went back to that same room with that same machine, and it then had the results. So it does seem like a fair system. However, that's up to you. Me personally, I will never endorse a direct recorded electronic machine. I want hand-marked paper ballots that we can track at all time, and we have those receipts. But everybody here in Brazil seems to be fine with the system. We don't have many people push back against it. Bolsonaro complained about it, but that was the same system he won on. And it wasn't like Donald Trump when the system was completely different this time than the second time around from the first time. So it was a little hypocritical of him, but it seems like a fair system, but not one that I would 100% fully trust. That's just my personal opinions.
Just quickly, Sabby, I just want to say immediately when you get there, they have a voter roll book and it has your picture on it. You have to present either your physical ID or your QR coded ID digitally from your cell phone. It's one of those two. Your fingerprints are more than likely in the system. You had to have registered before. You can only go vote in the place that you're registered to that's near your house. You can't just vote wherever you want. There is no vote by mail. And so you have to show your ID, and then they take your fingerprints, and then they match you again. And if for some reason you're not appearing here, they have to have another way of checking you, find you in the voter roll and say, okay, this is you, blah, blah, blah. And then the machine from your finger, it's all part of one machine. It's just 2 parts, is connected to the machine where you just put in a code. Every candidate has a code. So they voted for, I believe, 5 candidates or 6. I can't remember if it was 5 or 6. It was a governor, a state senator, and several other positions depending on the state, and then of course the presidency, and they all have a specific code. Lula's was 13, and so they would mark 13. So for Lula, and whoever Bolsonaro had a different numerical code, and all of that has to match. And then at the end they print out a tally that says in each polling room how many people voted, and 65 for Lula, 75 for Bolsonaro, and so on and so forth. And he was going room to room to check in that particular voting location. So while it's all electronic, and we would like more of a paper trail, it was still open source. And like you said, you could go back and check. And I would prefer way more to our system we have in the United States. But as Pasta says, it's always good to have a paper trail. Venezuela has both. They do the electronic, and then they print the paper as well. So it's interesting for sure. But we didn't see any sort of like weirdness to it at all.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm curious, why do you guys think that or feel that mainstream media is trying to make it seem like Lula is like this far radical extremist on the left? You described him more so as like a progressive, like Democrat. Why do you think mainstream media is trying to fearmonger people into believing that he's like this far extreme, like leftist? And even if he was, so what? Who cares? But why do you feel they're doing that?
I think mainstream media doesn't want anything remotely close to a Lula, especially in the West, because in spite of Lula being like, comparatively to people like Daniel Ortega or Castro or Chavez, milquetoast in that comparison, he still is worker focused and is a union guy. He came up from the union. He's definitely like what a hardcore, hard fighting Bernie Sanders was at one point, like, and even more so, right? And more so because he came from the worker rural class, and he's from Sao Paulo and the poor areas of Sao Paulo. He's not a guy that grew up in wealth. And so they don't want people to think that that's a possibility and that somebody campaigning on these things is feasible, even though to people in Latin America, he's a progressive Democrat. And by the way, the reason people in Latin America feel that way is because you have really strong leftist social movements here. We just spent some time talking to them. Basically, the MST is this organization of getting a land back from the intense privatization going on in Brazil. And they focus on food sovereignty, and they focus on clean eating, meaning because there's a lot of contaminants going on in the Amazon and in our food in general. They're focused on that since Bayer and Monsanto are really taking over the Amazon. And so what they do is they've had a history of decades of getting land back for people. And they do this because the privatization has increased massively in Brazil, and they organize in a way where they create a parallel structure to the government that has failed them. And this is exactly what we should be doing in the United States. And yet we're so busy focused on things that don't matter instead of organizing on class issues. They basically, I would compare them to something of more of a rural Black Panther society, where they were providing food, they were providing housing, jobs, and so many things for an underclass of people that always get left behind. And I was so flabbergasted when we were listening to him. I'm like, this is what the left in the United States needs to be doing, and they do it so well.
Yep. The only thing they don't get, like kind of like the Black Panthers, is that they're anti-gun. So the gun laws that came forward, which allow the privatization of militarized groups within these states, which are pretty much, slaughtering a lot of these indigenous people, they don't agree with that. I said, well, why don't you guys take up arms and arm yourself? They laughed. They're like, we're pacifists. We're like, we don't want guns within our community. I mean, and that's okay, but it's, that's it. And also, like what Fam said, this is the thing. Lula, the reason why they're frightened of him, he's not a Marxist, but he's a compromise between a Marxist and a capitalist. You know what I'm saying? He's going to divert resources to the poor areas, whatnot. He's going to help the poorest of the poor. And that's why they hate him. We saw some of these people, these workers, they believe in real Marxism. This is why RBN's got to come to the Global South with the combo couch, and we got to do this. You guys got to see this, because they're economic Marxists. They don't believe in any of that campus Marxism BS. They don't buy into any of that bourgeois BS. You know what I'm saying? They're all about economics, workers' rights. They want to organize around economic and class issues. And I think that really scares the living bejesus out of the ruling class, because if they see this type of kind of like organization, it really scares them. It's not like the United States where you say somebody, he's a communist, but he or she might be all about, the cultural BS, all the, what do they call it?
For Biden.
Yeah, the culturalist Marxism. When people call Biden a communist, it just makes me laugh. Like, are you kidding me? They don't get caught up in all that BS. They understand where they're coming from. They understand it's about class, money, resources. And I think that scares the ruling class more than anything. And like I said, Lula is not a communist, but I think he's a compromise between the capitalists and the communists, because he's going to divert those resources to the people who need them most. And that's what scares the oligarchs.
Wow. Awesome. I'm wondering too, in reference to, because I know you guys covered, or I know Pastor, you were there in Colombia as well. Do you see some type of shift happening in the Global South politically? Do you feel like most of the countries that you've been to are now moving further and further, like to the left? Or do you feel like it's more so about the candidates that have run? They're going for the people, or do you feel like there's just a general shift of them moving further to the left?
Well, I think it's the real left. It's funny because we talked to a lot of the anti-imperialists that go out there. They're like, there's no left in America, but there's an American left. But it really, to tell you the truth, it's all about national sovereignty. And these countries are getting closer and closer to calling their own shots. In a lot of these countries we went to, like Colombia, there's American bases there. There's military U.S. base with U.S. troops in their country waiting there. They want more of national sovereignty. And I don't think it's necessarily a left or a right move. I think it's a populist move. I think it's a national move. It's national sovereignty. You know, when people say nationalism is bad, I don't think it's bad in every single case, especially when the people want to have the right to their own land, their own resources, and decide their own path forward. And I think that's what it is more than anything. I think we all get caught up too much in left and right. We have to understand what are the needs of all the people out there. And I think in a lot of these other countries, there's been a lot of people who you might consider, traditionally conservative, who are going to vote for what they think is the populist decision so that their people can eat and they can, make the best of their own resources instead of just shipping them out to everywhere. And I think that's what really scares the United States empire is the fact is like, we have no factories in our country. We have no manufacturing anymore. We don't make anything. Everything's imported. So if we lose all those businesses, that cheap labor, those cheap resources, they're going to really lose control, and that's going to be the end of them. So I think that's what scares them more than anything. And I think most of these people, they're not voting for leftists, they're voting for national sovereignty.
I think that question can be answered if you understand that U.S. politics is largely different from the global South, because the global South has been exploited by the West and by the United States. So the problems that they see are immediately in need of resolution are basic things like having electricity, food, water, and a sort of sanitation. Meanwhile, in the United States, we're distracted because we have been given this sort of commodity and distraction to keep us completely distracted. And so we don't really see the side effects of the class warfare until recently. So many people have lived completely oblivious to everything that's happening. In the global South, people are victims of US interventionism and imperialism. So they've had to sort of face it right away. And so what we're seeing is this shift in Latin America is, as Pasta said, them wanting to decide for themselves what kind of leaders to pick. And in some countries, it's progressive, like in Mexico, Argentina, and Colombia, where they had such just nefarious neoliberal policies that were either drug cartel led or it was just civil warfare for decades, like in Colombia, that they just wanted to have some relevance of going back to democracy. And I think we can see something like that in Brazil. And then in other countries, it's like they're at a point where they don't need the United States, where they speak out against the United States more and more. And we're talking about like Nicaragua, Venezuela, and Cuba, countries that are the closest to getting to socialism, but of course have suffered severely the sanctions of the United States. So there's like that red pink tide sort of situation happening, along with the multipolarity that we're seeing with China and Russia. Now there's avenues for economic development without the United States. So I think that's also playing a larger role in the context of why these countries keep electing these leaders. But also the left in the global South focuses on economics, like I said, because they've had to, whereas the left in the United States, we're focused on a lot of social issues, but that it doesn't mean that they're not important. They just have to be backed by economics. And when they're not backed by economics, you're talking about, let's say on the left, when they talk about racism in liberal circles, it's just symbolics. When they talk about racism in many of these social movements here in Brazil, like the United States, and this is why it's very similar, experienced slavery, experienced racism, discrimination. And so that's what makes it similar. But I think here they try to deal with it more in a class way. In Latin America in general, they try to deal with those racial issues and tie them to class more than what we do in the United States. And so it's kind of interesting how, the countries that have been under the boot of the empire for so long are able to see past that and say, okay, we got to get this first because otherwise we're not going to get there. And you can see that be manifested through Cuba's family code that they just voted to allow, gay couples to have children and be recognized and all of that. Communism in Latin America is a little more conservative. Socialist countries are a little more conservative than in the United States. But at the same time is like, if the people want something, they allow it. And that's what the trend that we're seeing here.
Yeah. And I ditto again, when I say I'd love to bring RBN down, to these. I'd love to get a picture of Rome standing with the Sandinistas. You know what I'm saying? I would like Rome stand next to the Sandinistas. This is awesome and stuff. And I'd love to, have you guys come down with us on one of these trips. But I've always wanted to bring conservatives down there too as well, because they're so in the dark about what really goes on. They have this kind of Mike Pompeo kind of mentality about what Marxism is and stuff like that. I mean, it's all about cultural bullshit where Pompeo is just everything he dislikes is Marxism. That shirt, I don't like it. It's Marxism. But, you know, you go to Nicaragua, you see them. They're very like conservative socially. You know, we went to Bilwi, which is on the opposite side of where Managua is with our friend over here. And we went and met these people. They are very Christian. They're very, you know, they're very religious. They're not really found about legalizing marijuana. They don't believe in gay marriage, you know what I'm saying, or abortion. You know what I'm saying? I made a statement, and, you know, fam is always correcting me. I'm like, you guys are like Trumpers who speak Spanish. And I'm stretching it a little bit, but if you can understand what I'm saying, they're very, very socially conservative. And this is in Bilwi, which is an autonomous zone. And people don't understand it. There's 8 regions in Nicaragua. 2 of them are autonomous. They make their own laws. They have their own judges. The federal government only comes in when there's a disaster or to help with infrastructure projects. So people in the States are so naive to what really goes on in the global South, on the left and on the right. And all we can do is go down there, expose it and show it and tell people what we see and come back and bring the goods.
Awesome. Awesome. So if, let's say after the second round, let's say if Lula wins, what do you think this will mean for our country politically? What do you think this would mean?
Well, it's going to be a struggle because Bolsonaro's party is already winning seats within their Congress and whatnot. What's that? Parliament, inside their parliament. And it's going to be tough. You know what I'm saying? A president can only do so much, you know, so whether he wins or not, you know, I mean, at this point, if Bolsonaro wins, you might see some serious stuff, some real civil unrest take place over here. So, I mean, you know, I don't know how much how much Lula can do, but you like the fact that he does have his eye on making sure to take care of the most, you know, poverty. I don't know what's going to happen. You know what I'm saying? Just like here in the United States, and then we have this argument, this debate, and, you know, about capitalism and globalism. So, I mean, it's going to be interesting to see what's going on. It's, you know, I don't know what Lula's place will be when it comes to that, but it's going to be interesting. But with the Biden government, I don't even know. I am so, it's very, very complicated to think what will be. I just know that if Lula does come back into power, I think you're going to see a lot more attention being paid to those favelas that we went and visited. What are they called now?
Comunidades.
That's it.
Comunidades.
The comunidades. And I think that is, like I said, at the end of the day, I don't care where you stand on protocols and the boop boop. People die from hunger more than anything in this whole planet. So that's something that needs to be addressed. And Lula, he stays on message. You know, I want every Brazilian to have a cup of coffee, 2 square meals, and a roof over their head. The other day, he goes, I don't want kids to split an egg and eat crackers. Like, enough is enough. So I think that is right now the most important thing. But I'm glad that I don't have to vote in this election whatsoever.
I think Lula will get the second round. I think it's going to be close, but I think he will. And the reason I think that is because the centrists are divided. The small business owners, business class, I would say, are divided. You have a lot of people campaigning for him, people that are hurting. You have this push to get younger people to vote, which is they're on his side generally. And I think he's going to take it. Some of the people that didn't vote for him in this first round are going to vote in the second round. I still think it'll be close. And I do think like it's not going to be easy for him because of the fact that so many Bolsonaristas are getting into parliament. And there is that, you know, anti-Lula sentiment because he represents the underclass. And this is, I could talk for hours about this, but there's this Latin American self-hating sort of just neo-colonial that is kind of eviscerated in the neo-colonial sense of not liking the poor, not liking the people from the peasants from the villages, the campesinos coming in and into the city and looking down on them and saying, oh, these people are ignorant, uneducated. You can see it manifested in, you know, how people treated Evo Morales, how people treated Hugo Chavez because they were from a lower class. So that's the whole other element of that. But in general, I think what we're going to see from Lula is if he does win and becomes president of Brazil, he's going to act very much like, I would say, like a Xiomara Castro or a Gustavo Petro. He's not going to nationalize anything. He's not going to do anything crazy. He has said as much in his speeches that we've attended. He wants to work with every single country. He wants Brazil to go back out of the poverty index. He wants to keep peace. When he was asked about Ukraine, Russia, he said his only position was peace, because obviously he's running a campaign. He's not going to get a position on that. And as much as there was a picture with him with Klaus Schwab, there was also a picture with him and Gaddafi and Xi Jinping. So I think he's going to be the kind of guy that works and tries to work more with Latin American countries, because he has mentioned that desire to do so. And because Latin America is going into that direction, where we're seeing Colombia and Venezuela reopen their borders and have flights now, that push is happening. This is historic. I think we're going to see more Latin American countries cooperating with each other. So it's not going to be that easy for the United States to just say Brazil's going to do our bidding anymore, because the climate has shifted. So I think that's where we're going.
And make no mistake about it, Sabrina, I want your audience to understand this. Okay, that was a win for Bolsonaro last night. To get to the second round was a win. It was bad for Lula, and it was good for Bolsonaro. Does that mean that Lula can't win and shouldn't win? I'm not saying that, no, but now I believe he's vulnerable. A lot of people thought he was going to put this out. The polls were all saying it's first round, one and done. And it was one of the reasons why we said we should maybe get to the first round like we did for Colombia, thinking that Gustavo Petro can wrap it up. And he was vulnerable. But that's the thing about it is that Gustavo Petro's candidate is not the candidate that Lula has. Lula has Bolsonaro to deal with, and he's got the whole West as far as like the Trumpers and all these other people, the Steve Bannon, they're coming down.
And even some of the left supporting Bolsonaro, because they think he's like challenging globalists. But he's himself, he's actually gone to the World Economic Forum himself. He's definitely not, he's a privatizer. He wants to privatize everything. If you want me to compare Trump to Bolsonaro, I firmly believe Bolsonaro is 10,000 times worse. I mean, Trump is just, I just don't think Trump was a danger. I think Bolsonaro is really, really much about privatization, more than I've seen in any way. And when you meet a lot of his supporters, and we haven't even released all the videos, they're very proud of what they believe and who they are. And it was kind of just a lot to see that and see the difference in class, race, and everything versus like a Lula supporter. It was very, very, very divided, more polarized than what I see here in the United States, to be honest.
Awesome. All right. So when is the second round?
October 30th.
Okay. Are you guys going to be there the whole time until then? Or are you going to go back to your respective places?
I'm coming back tomorrow, man. 11 days in Brazil, you know what I'm saying? I mean, you know what we're all about, Sabby. And I want to thank everybody, because there's a lot of people I see that watch your show. They watch our show. We have a lot of crossover audience. Everybody who went to the givesendgo.com/theconvocountsbrazil, they were awesome. I mean, this is not cheap. You know what I'm saying? We had to put this all on ourselves and do this, but we're so passionate about it. We've been waiting for this election, Bolsonaro for Lula, for like over a year for sure. We've been talking about it. We're going to go to it. And I can't thank people enough for really helping us out to do this. But for us to stay until then would just be way too expensive. So this is it for us. And I probably will not be able to make it back on the 30th. I have another engagement on the 29th, and Fam is on the other side of the planet. And, so it's tough.
Yeah. I was kind of upset I didn't go to the Donbass, but I was happy to be here. So, because all my friends ended up going when I wasn't there. So it's just kind of
referendum. Like, I would want to go to that and stuff. But maybe our team will send you to this one.
Yeah, it might happen.
You never know and stuff. But we'll see.
Awesome. All right, guys. Anything you want to plug before you head out?
Well, we did plug the givesendgo.com/theconvocouchbrazil. You see how I slipped it in there, and stuff like that. But you know what I'm saying? Like, listen, they can go to that one. They can go to the Convo Couch, the givesendgo.com, support the support the Convo Couch. That's still up, because next year it's all about Cuba. In March, it's all about Argentina in October, and who knows what in between. They can always go to the Convo Couch at Rockfin. If they don't know, we've been demonetized now on YouTube for almost 2 years for doing this work right here, talking about elections, talking about stuff that goes down in the global South. So anyway, they can come support us. And we understand things are tight, 5, 10, 7, 2, whatever they can do, 27. Please do. We're just going to take that money and we're going to put our boots on the ground wherever they tell us to go. And we can't thank you guys out there enough. And thank you so much, Sabby,
Thank you.
for always having us on. This is like my third or fourth time on this show. And, we've been watching your show and watching you closely as well. And we feel a bond between you and RBN. And thank you so much again for always letting us come on and get the news out from wherever we go.
Oh, thanks so much, guys. Keep up the great work.
Yeah.
You too.
Let Rome know we're going to get a picture with Rome and the Sandinistas in Nicaragua.
I'm going to tell him. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
All right, guys. Awesome. Awesome. So if you did not know about that election, you know now. Very, very important to cover there.